Okay, I got it. So my name is Barbara Goldberg, and I've been a member of Pelagic for a number of years. I think Pelagic is the most incredible sailing club there is. All of my close friends come from Pelagic Sailing Club over the years. I, at one time, ran Caribbean trips down to Pelagic using, that's a funny sound.
I'm sorry, that's my clock, which is
Oh, okay.
1850.
You might want to mute.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it won't go off for another hour. So.
Okay.
You can hit the mute if you.
We used to charter boats, and I'd have 3 to 4 boats, 28 to 30 people come down to the Caribbean, and we'd sail for a week around the islands. I would usually get a couple of skippers that were skippers up here, and then we'd load the boat with the crew that wanted to come. And we had some absolutely fantastic times down there. If anybody wants to take that over, I'd be really happy to help them launch that program again. Now I live in Florida, and I have to say that I love the meetings. The fact that there's Zoom meetings has been absolutely extraordinary for me, because I still feel connected. And I come up every year, and I have enjoyed sailing with many of you, and look forward to sailing with some of the people that I haven't met yet. And I will be at Spectacle Island on Saturday, and really looking forward to seeing everybody and meeting people I haven't met before. So I guess that's my story. I'd like to say that I've been following the conversations on the internet about harnesses and PFDs, and it kind of leads into my tale. I must emphasize that staying on the boat is much safer than falling overboard. Rescues are difficult, and with the best textbook conditions, the instructions for rescues leave a scar on both the victim and the people who have done the rescuing. My tale begins on October 10th, 2009. That's a while ago. It involves 2 boats, my 34-foot blue-hulled Sabre sloop named Grand Finale with 5 people on board, and a white 22-foot racing sloop with 3 people on board. I don't know what the name of their boat was. On my boat, I had 3 people who had sailed with me for 15 years in the Caribbean and in Massachusetts, and 1 person who had not sailed in 20 years. This was her, quote, maiden voyage out there. The location of this event is Manchester Harbor.
I'll start putting up my chart if you want to hold on 1 second. I'm going to share some content. Let's see. I'm going to share my whole screen with you folks.
Okay. So I have to hit escape, or
okay, we see that, folks.
So you got to pull it up a little bit higher. That'll be good for now. The actual event happened outside Manchester Harbor and in the area called Manchester Bay behind Misery Island.
Describe where that is on this chart, because I'm sorry, I don't have a pointer or a cursor, folks.
Let's see, how do I describe it?
Right above the Salem Sound, up above the D.
Up above Salem Sound, and there's an area, it's small, it says Manchester Bay. Right, there's a little island that is Great Misery or Baker's. I can't tell which it is from where I am right now.
So right below the word
Misery, that's sticking up there. It's kind of, it's hard to show. If you went to the other map, it would show the other chart.
Can you see that okay?
Yeah, scroll up and now you can see the area. Oops, went too far. Come back down. Or you can keep it there. So my event is between can 5 and nun 4 and out under the area that says Manchester Bay. That's where the rescue event took place,
Right in the middle of the lower chart.
right in the middle of the lower chart.
The red dot is where approximately the Man Overboard started.
Right.
Okay.
That's the approximate start of the Man Overboard. Let's see. Our final rescue is behind Nun 5 on the rocks, where it says Half Tide Rocks. That's where we wound up at the end.
Nun 4.
We started our event at 1400 hours and finished at 1700 hours. So it was a 3-hour event for my crew on grand finale. The wind was 25 knots northwest, gusting to 40 knots northwest. The seas were 3.5 to 5 feet. There were small craft warnings. The outside temperature was 68 degrees and the water temperature was 65 degrees. The total rescue time from my first Mayday call till when we got the first Man Overboard to Tuck's Landing was about 60 minutes. Grand finale began the day in a brisk 25-knot wind out of Marblehead. And if you go to the top, we left Marblehead and went by Baker's Island and had Baker's Island on our starboard side, Misery on our port, and we're on our way to Gloucester for a fun, frolicking day. We got as far as probably halfway up and decided that the winds were building, the seas were building, and it was getting cold. We were all feeling the cold air and decided that we'd turn around and motor and sail back to the entrance of Manchester Harbor, take our sails down and spend an hour lunchtime inside the harbor. It was amazing how different the conditions were. We pulled into Manchester Harbor and it is an extraordinarily protected harbor. We had no wind. We had huge sunshine, so we all warmed up and it was like a lake in there. It was really beautiful. About an hour later at 2 o'clock or 1400 hours, we decided that we would head home. We had talked about whether we were going to motor or sail back. And we decided we would come out of the harbor and see what it was like behind Misery Island. If it was really rough or we looked out into the channel and it looked like there was a lot of wind, we would know right away because that area that leads into Manchester Harbor from Baker's Island kicks up a lot of wind if there's wind out there, or if you're having wind off of the land, it kind of shows you what the water is like out there. So we were motoring. We got to about can 7 and a 22-foot sailboat was ahead of us. And they decided that they'd hank on and raise their jib, which they did. And we all wondered why they were doing that because we knew what it was like outside. And we decided, well, maybe they didn't know, or maybe they just thought it would be a fun day to sail. On that white boat that was motoring out ahead of us, there was a grandfather who was 75 years old, a father who was 45 years old, and a son who's 17 years old. I will continue to refer to them as grandfather, father, and son, because I don't know their names. The son had been trained to do rescues because he was part of the racing group out of Manchester, and they're really strong in how they teach their young racers and their race committees and things like that. So we got as far as can 5, and the father went ahead to raise the mainsail. And I was surprised. I don't usually raise my jib first and then raise my mainsail, but that's the sequence that they used. They got just outside that shallow area after can 5, and they got hit with a gust of wind. The winds at that point were gusting about 35 to 45. One of the people, the grandfather, popped right out of the boat. It was like he was a cork on a champagne bottle. Deb on my boat yelled, "Man overboard," and immediately started to point and continued to give me reports of the boat and the crew activity. She went midship instead of going to the bow so that I would hear her in the strong winds, kept pointing and talked back and forth to me. The white boat, the sailing boat, threw life jackets and donut rings and cushions, but they were going so fast with their tight sails that they just flew by the man overboard. But they did come back and they attempted a first rescue. Deb started to report that the man overboard, the grandfather, was going down and he wasn't coming up as quickly and he wasn't staying on the surface as long. And he never used his arms to try to keep himself up. I made the man overboard call to, I did a Mayday call after the first attempt to rescue him. They went by a second time. I really thought that they were going to get him because they really had control of the boat and they seemed to know what they were doing. But each time, just as they got to the point where he popped out, was where the gust of wind was, or it was where the strongest winds were at that point. Maybe there was a valley in the land in that area, but they blew by him a second time. Eric reported the race attempts. Deb reported the race attempts. And I said, well, we're going to go in and help. At this time, I was talking to the Coast Guard about the man overboard, told them that Grand Finale was going to go in and help with the event to pick them up. The Coast Guard wanted to check with me that, first of all, did I know where I was? Because they had just received a call that a boat was on the rocks in Marblehead Harbor. Was I making a mistake of my location? I said, no, I was not making a mistake. I knew the area and I gave them my GPS coordinates and told them that there was a man in the water. They told me, they asked me if we had life jackets. I told them that the people on board had life jackets, but the man in the water did not. They instructed me at that point to switch to channel 22. We continued to stay on 22. One problem for me was my radio is down below. It is not up above, and I didn't have a second radio or a repeater up above. My crew was watching and reporting the activities that were going on, and Deb said, we've got to go in now. So at 14:17, which was about 17 minutes after we had left the harbor, I repeated to the Coast Guard that we were going in. They said that they had changed what they were doing and they were coming to us because we had a man in the water, but it would be 10 to 15 more minutes before they would get to us.
Barbara, can I hold you for 1 second there?
Sure.
This is a critical thing. The Coast Guard first was confused hearing this woman on saying she's on a blue boat and a man over, and I have a man overboard. First of all, they thought it was off her boat, and B, they thought it was the same boat that had previously called them, perhaps, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes prior.
No, it was closer than that. The calls were 2 minutes apart for blue-hulled sailboats, one in Marblehead on the rocks with crew that needed to be rescued because the boat was going to break apart, and my call out of Manchester that there was a man in the water.
Right. And so the Coast Guard was confused. So the boat that they dispatched, or boats, were first headed for to Marblehead. By the way, the two locations are actually 5 miles apart. So that's an important factor here. It may have slowed them down in getting to Barbara's site.
Yeah, they were coming out of Gloucester, and when I got them on the radio, they had just gotten into the boat. So they had to leave from Gloucester Station, come down to Manchester. And they agreed to come to us because we had a man in the water. But they knew that it was going to take them 10 to 15 minutes to get to our location.
That's a little surprising to me because they are very fast boats, and of course they have to slow down perhaps the seas a bit. But in any ways,
They
they
had to
change.
get out of the harbor too. You know, they're not right at the beginning of the harbor.
That's
So,
true.
yeah.
Yep.
So, and they said that the sea conditions were really wild. Now, I don't know. The other thing that I didn't know, and of course, we're close to land. So, yes, we're getting hit with gusts, but maybe other boats were getting hit with more. What I found out long time later was there were multiple calls that day for help. There were many, many boats that needed rescue that day off of Manchester, Salem, Marblehead, and Nahant.
And remind us what day of the week it is.
It was a Saturday, and it was Saturday of Columbus Day weekend.
So there's no wonder there's a lot of people putting around and running into rocks and getting caught out in heavier seas than they expected.
Yeah, I think the seas and the winds kicked up much faster than most people expected. So I made my first call, and we got through all of that with the Coast Guard. And 2 minutes after my first call, after the attempts to pick up the grandfather, the father dove into the water. The minute the father dove into the water, I switched to 16 and made a second call and said that now there were 2 men in the water outside of Manchester Harbor, and we really needed help. The Coast Guard was disappointed that I had gone back to 16, but I didn't think I'd get anybody's attention on 22. And I was just hoping. There were no boats in Manchester Bay. So there was nobody in the Bay Area that was going to help us. But I thought maybe somebody's outside of Baker doing the same thing that we were doing. But that isn't what was going on. Eric immediately stood watching the second man, and Connie took the helm each time I had to go down to use the radio. After the second Mayday call, we yelled over to the son in the boat and said, "We're going to pick the men up." I'm not sure if he heard us, but his boat was out of control, and he was having a really hard time trying to get the sails down. Every time he tried to go forward, it just was really awful. And he couldn't put his engine on. He had to drop his engine to get it to back in the water, and he couldn't do it at the speed he was moving.
Barbara, can I ask that because new people are probably showing up as we speak here.
Okay.
So could you also say again the ages and the 3 people on the other boat?
The 3 people on the other boat, there was the grandfather who's 75, the father who is in his 50s, and the son who's 17. And all 3 of them were serious racers and had raced out of Manchester and sailed there for many years. So they knew the water, they knew the boat. And I mean, you could tell by what they accomplished that they were amazing sailors. The father, it turns out, was a Navy SEAL. It took him 10 strokes to reach his father. It was phenomenal watching him swim to his dad. I kept standing by because it looked like they were going to complete the rescue, and I didn't want to get in between them and the Man Overboard, but it didn't stop us from watching and reporting.
And where are we in the timeline right now? Are we 10 minutes in?
So we're probably 10 to 15 minutes into the time. After the second Mayday call, while I said we were going in to start a rescue, my crew, Eric grabbed the life sling, Connie took the port sheet off of the winch on our boat and wrapped the polyurethane rope from the life sling onto the winch. I told Connie that the rope would slip, but she didn't hear me, and she didn't have anything else to connect to it at the moment. Deb, while still pointing at the two people, dropped the ladder into the water. At this point, the first person had been in the water for about 10 minutes and the second person 5 minutes.
Now, the initial victim is now partially in the life sling or not?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not in the life sling yet. It took another 2 or 3 minutes for us to get over to where they were because I had been standing back and I didn't want to come rushing in. I came in slowly. We pulled up close to them. The father barely had the grandfather's head above water, but he did have his head above water. Neither had life jackets on. The father said that if he'd had a life jacket and he had to go under for his dad, he would not have been able to get under. And that's true. So that's one thing to think about when you dive in with the life jacket. If you do have to go under, maybe you have to trail the life jacket for a few minutes or sit on top of it. We threw the father our life sling to put around the grandfather. The grandfather at that point, because it had been so cold out, all of us had multiple layers of clothing on. And by that time, his clothing with the water had swollen and the life sling did not fit around him. We were able, the father was able to get one arm above the life sling and just barely got the second arm over the life sling. At this point, the grandfather had been in the water for 13 minutes.
We're showing the life sling now. Everybody can see that, I hope.
You think it's big enough that it would go around everybody, but it isn't. And especially the way that it bends and turns.
It doesn't open all the way. The theory is you pull it down over your arms and head and you sort of climb into it like a sweater, I guess you could say. And so that yellow line is a loop, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And that was the yellow polyethylene line that we had on the winch, which is absolutely the wrong way to use the life sling, but it was all we had at the moment. So the father was very strong, and with the life sling on his dad, he tried to push the grandfather up the ladder, thinking that the three of us could grab his dad and pull him up the ladder. But at this point, I think that the grandfather weighed about 300 pounds with all the wet clothing. And there was no way with the small opening that we have with the ladder that we could grab him and get him up. We tried it for about 2 minutes and it just didn't work. So the next thing was pull the grandfather over because we knew now that the grandfather was unconscious. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. So we couldn't get any help from the grandfather at all. The father held the grandfather up and carefully moved him alongside the cockpit of my boat, which is about a 3.5 foot distance water line to the rail. 3 of the crew put themselves under the lifeline with their chests on the rail and grabbed parts of the clothing of the grandfather so that they could hold him above the water, because we knew that we weren't going to be able to lift him with the life sling. Even if we had a rope, he would have fallen out. There wasn't enough of him connected to the life sling to move him. So that now we're almost 15 minutes into the grandfather being in the water and about 10 minutes, the father being in the water. The father then got on board and he was hypothermic. I mean, it was definite that he was. He didn't know his name. He couldn't tell us anything. We took him down below and my 4th crew member gave him warm clothing, warm, dry clothing to put on and made him some hot tea so that he could warm up. As soon as he felt a little warm, he came up and spoke to his son, who at this point had taken the sails down and had dropped the engine into the water, told him to go back to the dock and call an ambulance. I made a third Mayday call to say that we had a man tied to the side of our boat who we could not lift up, and he was unconscious.
Can you remind us what channel you were on for that?
I went back to 16. That's something that's really important to remember. The Coast Guard wants you on 22, but if you want to get everybody's attention, you have to switch back to 16.
We have to remember that Barbara's hoping against all odds that somebody in Manchester or one of the harbor masters, like Beverly Harbor Master or one of the other harbor masters, will come out and with a crew to maybe manhandle this fellow into their boat with a lower freeboard.
So my crew held on to him, and about 25 minutes later, sooner than that, we started to get hit broadside by the waves, and our boat was rolling. And at this point, we were close to Nun 4, almost at the area where the rocks are. We had come inside of Nun 4. The boat rolled twice, and the third time it rolled, we got water over the rail. Now I'm worried that we're crushing the Man Overboard. And I thought, should we move him around to the other side? No, that's just too risky, because we only have his clothing. That's all we're really holding on to. Should I try to get him into the jib? No, because that means I have to unfurl the jib, and that's going to put too much wind in the boat. Should I drop the mainsail? No, we'll collect too much water. That's not going to work. So I thought, well, maybe I can start the engine and get into calmer water. Well, I turned the engine on, and immediately my crew said, you can't do that. His legs are moving. You're sucking him under the boat. So that didn't work either. Probably 5 minutes after that, I looked up and saw a whaler speeding out of the harbor. And
Barbara, why don't we pause for a minute and see if there are any questions up to this point? Does
okay.
anybody mute and ask any questions?
So you had just a mainsail up, Barbara?
I had no sails up at this moment.
No sails up.
We were still on our decision that we would motor out of the harbor, and this boat just came in front of us. And as soon as I saw what was happening with them, I didn't bother to put up any sails, because I really thought, you know, this is a disaster waiting to happen. We all felt that way because we knew how rough it was outside. Right. And when they raised the main, and not only that, they had everything sheeted in tight. They really wanted the full experience. And we all looked, my entire crew said, this is just a disaster waiting to happen. And I said, I'm not raising a mainsail till I see that they can sail the boat. And then it was obvious that that was a wise decision on our part, because it was only 2 minutes later that there was a man in the water.
Right.
What was the wind direction?
We're looking at the chart. The man went in the water where the red dot is. And I went as far as between the S and the Y to watch what was going on.
What was the wind direction?
The wind was west-northwest.
Okay.
So
basically,
given your original timeline that the Coast Guard gave you, shouldn't they have been there by now?
Well, they should have been. And I think that what happened was, at the same time that they came between Misery Island and Manchester, they saw the whaler race up to our boat. So they figured that the whaler was going to take the guy. And I think they stood back at that point. And the good thing with the whaler was they had two gigantic, oh my gosh, I can't think of it. What you put on the side of your boat. I'm sorry.
Riggers? Outriggers?
No. They,
Fenders?
Davits?
Fenders?
they came out with enormous fenders.
Oh, fenders.
And they came up to the stern and they said, we're going to pull alongside your boat. and we'll be able to pull him out. The fenders will keep us far enough away from the boat. And they did. They kept him far enough away from the boat. And they reached down and they said to my crew, let go of him. And Eric, who at this point they'd been holding on to him for 30 minutes, said, we're not letting go of him until we see him in your boat, which was one of the smartest things that happened because they dropped him on their first try. They just had no idea how heavy he was. On their,
Remind us where we are at this point on the chart now. Are we
on
between
the chart now, we're probably between N5 and N2.
N4?
N4 and N2, I'm sorry.
Now, I just want to mention that it's almost high tide. And so the rocks that you see on the chart prominently here, they only show up, like it says, half tide. They probably weren't visible. Is that fairly accurate?
They were not visible from the surface, but I know that area, so I know they were there. On the third time that the boat rolled over, Deb yelled out, all I see is the top of his head and the rocks. I think there was maybe a foot of water or 2 feet of water over the rocks at the point that Deb called that, and they rolled over the third time. When they rolled over the third time, I said to them, if we roll over again, you've got to let go of them. Because when we rolled over the third time, my crew was upside down in the water. And all I thought of was if they hadn't had their knees inside in the cockpit, I would have had 4 people in the water. And at the rocks, there's no way I could have handled 4 people in the water. So I had said that, but that's about when we started to see the whaler coming toward us, and we didn't roll over a 4th time. And the way the whaler got this man in the boat was one of them reached way down into the water and grabbed his leg and pulled his leg into the boat. The second man in the whaler at the same time grabbed his belt buckle. So they rolled him over partially on the side of the whaler. And then each one of my crew, as they were able to pull a little bit more of him and a little bit more of him into the boat, let go. By the time they got to where Eric was holding him, they had almost all of his body in the water, and I mean in the boat, and Eric was able to hand him over so that they got his shoulder and his head. They took him face down to the dock. They didn't even roll him over again. We didn't know if he was dead or alive at that point. I'm not sure they knew if he was dead or alive. He was so gray. What we had accomplished with the life sling was keeping his face out of the water and having him on the lee side of the boat. He was able to breathe. And that's one of the most important things in a rescue, is to make sure that the person in the water can continue to breathe and gets as little water in his mouth as possible.
Barbara, for the late arrivals, can you remind us a little more about the whaler, how big it is, who was on board it, and tell us about the crew of the whaler?
On the whaler were 2 men from the fire department. They heard our first call of distress and went down to their whaler. So they had to, the reason it took them so much time was they had to leave the fire department and get to their whaler and then start their whaler up. And it was way down in the very beginning part of the harbor. So they had, they started on my first call, but it took them till that time, 15 or 20 minutes, maybe even a little bit longer to get to us.
I just want to know where the Manchester Harbor Master was, because that would never happen with the fellow who's the harbor master now.
I know. At that time, the Manchester Harbor Master says he didn't understand my call, that it was my fault, I was garbled. I would have thought, okay, maybe I was garbled, but the fireman said, you were as clear as can be in all 3 calls. And the Coast Guard said that too, that
Wow.
even though they couldn't believe that there was a second boat calling in 2 minutes that had the same description with harbors beginning with M's,
Yeah.
that there was nothing unclear about my call. And then when I gave them the GPS and I told them, you know, what can we were at,
Yeah.
they knew exactly where we were.
Yeah. Wow.
But the harbor master, and you know, who knows, radios are different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe I was garbled on his radio.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you don't know.
Yeah.
He came out after, as far as I know, he came out after the whaler. I have to say, we were all working so hard to keep the grandfather alive that we weren't really paying attention to a lot of what was going around us.
Yeah, of course.
When the whaler left and my crew stood up, they were a bit dizzy, they were frozen, they were exhausted because they had been hanging over the side for 30 minutes or more, holding on to this man. That was when we looked around to the starboard side of the boat and saw the Coast Guard, the Manchester Harbor Master, the Beverly Police, and several other boats. There was a sea of blue flashing lights on our starboard side. It was really amazing. So now we still have one person on board who's hypothermic. And the Coast Guard looks at me and I said, and they said they were heading to Marblehead because, you know, they're still on their Marblehead rescue. I said, wait a minute, I have one more body on here that needs to be rescued and I'm on the rocks. He says to me, call Cito. I'll tell you, if I'd had a flare that I could have lit, it would have gone right into the Coast Guard boat. I was so mad. Call Cito. They came over to the starboard side of the boat, and the man who's the father got up out of the down below and got on the boat, and they said to him, "What's your name?" He didn't respond. They looked at me and they said, "Who are these people?" I said, "I don't know." And they went into a tirade about my taking two people I didn't know out for a swim and losing them, out for a sail and losing them overboard. I let them go through their whole thing. And when they were done, I said, "We're the rescue boat." They came off a different boat. That boat's not out here right now. So then the Coast Guard says to me, "Okay, throw us a line. We'll help you off the rocks and we'll take you into the harbor." Because I didn't know how much damage I might have done rolling over 3 times. And I wanted to take the boat back to Marblehead if I could. That was one of my goals.
Can you hold for a sec?
Yeah.
First of all, you forgot to mention that the boat actually hit the rocks, I think. And also, I'd like to know, were you in strictly radio communications with the Coast Guard, or were they like right next to you talking?
No, at the point that they told me that they were leaving, they were beside us. They were alongside us on the starboard side. Now, I think they had probably watched the whole rescue. I would say that if there were any boats and they saw what was going on, it was obvious that the whaler was the best choice for getting this man out of the water. And I think that's why nobody else came in. And they didn't want to increase a wake because at this point, the wind's blowing and the seas are moving. And I think that's why everybody stayed off on our starboard side. I don't know. I never asked anybody why they did that. But when the Coast Guard realized what had happened, they decided that they would take us off the rocks and help us go into Manchester Harbor. I started the engine and we were okay. I motored very, very slowly. We got to Tuck's Landing and there was another Coast Guard boat there. Deb, one of my crew, got off and they said, "Okay, who are the people that were in the water?" And Deb said, "I don't know." And they angrily said, "Where's your captain?" And she pointed to me and he comes over and he says, "Who are the people on your boat?" And I said, "I don't know their names." Again, I'm repeating the same scenario. "Well, why don't you know their names? Why did you have people on your boat that you didn't know?" And fortunately, Eric had shown me that the white sailboat was on the dock next to us. So I said, go over to the white boat. The people on the white boat know their names. That's the boat that we did the rescue for. So they left us and went over there. Now I have a decision. What do I do? The grandfather's already in an ambulance. He's gone. The father is feeling better and they're starting to put the boat away and getting it over to the mooring. But I want to get the boat back to Marblehead. So I watched and it didn't look like we were taking any more water on. There was water in the bilge, but not a tremendous amount. And I said, okay, we'll slowly go to Marblehead. Now the Coast Guard had learned that the people on the boat on the rocks had been taken off. So they didn't have to get to Marblehead in a hurry, but they still wanted to get to Marblehead to get the facts and everything. So they agreed to monitor us on Channel 12 and move slowly toward Marblehead as we move slowly toward Marblehead. And in the meantime, made arrangements with the Marblehead Harbor Master that we would tie up on his dock for the night, which was really very helpful. Because again, I didn't know if we were taking on water, or if we would be later on. And it was too late at that point to have anybody dive under the boat. So we got to the harbor master about 5 o'clock. He tied us up. He put 3 sump pumps on board the boat and said that we could keep the boat there. And the next morning, have a diver come and look at the boat. And that's what we did. That was the end of our harrowing experience. We all got off that boat shaking. I have to say that you're traumatized at the end. While it's happening, your adrenaline and your drive and your need to think clearly kicks in, but it doesn't take much after that to let all of that fall out. And I have to say that one of the reasons I could stay cool and calm about it in that moment was the pelagic programs that we had done. Trina Beneker had brought us the life sling because that's something that they use out on the Seattle coastline. And she thought it was very important that we learn how to do it. Pelagic members then working with the life sling and other programs, we did land programs on rescue and we did water programs on rescue. And I had been part of 2 of the water programs on rescue. So I had firsthand knowledge of what happens when you're doing rescues because I had been a part of many of them. And I have to thank the crew that brought their boats, the crews that agreed to be victims, and the crews that did the lifting and the hauling, because it's because of that I knew we were going to be able to get out of this situation. But I didn't know how long it was going to take. It seemed like it was hours while we were doing it. Aftermath of the explanations of what went on, the grandfather fortunately regained consciousness in the ambulance on the way to Beverly Hospital. They kept him there for 3 days as observation. The father recovered from hypothermia and helped the son put the boat away. We never heard from any of the family. And that was okay. It would have been really wonderful. I called once, I said, my crew would really like to meet the grandfather in person because of how hard they had worked, but the family felt that there was just too much trauma and it wasn't a good idea. The Mayday confusion became apparent when I learned how many rescues there had been during that day. And we hadn't heard the Marblehead rescue again because my radio was down below. I didn't hear that there were other Mayday calls. And once we switched to 22, I never heard anything from other radios because the only time I turned them on was when I switched to 16. I had a radio down below, and I had a radio that didn't allow for 2 channels. My boat was a 1984 Sabre, and we had the original radio on board. And when that radio went on, these features weren't available. My crew did an absolutely outstanding job. There was very little chatter between us. Everybody assumed a role and held it. And although we all acknowledged how frightening the situation was, nobody was panicked and everyone stuck to their job. Eric pointed and reported and held on to the victim. He requested a hat for the man overboard to keep his head warmer and to protect his head because the boat kept falling or, hitting him on the head. So that gave him a little bit of protection. Deb pointed and watched from the very beginning and did an excellent job reporting what was going on. And she alerted me as to how desperately close we were to the rocks, especially when the whalers left. Connie did a significant thing. She talked to the man overboard the whole time. Now, we didn't know if he was dead or alive, but she comforted him. And she kept saying to him, "You are safe. You will be out of the water soon. We won't leave you. We're here to help you. You're not alone." Alice, her role was keeping the son down below and warming him up. But he couldn't answer any of her questions. He couldn't smile, and he couldn't agree to anything. So each member had a significant role in saving the victim and saving the second person. What we thought about doing, I think I said during the talk, Alice tried to put some life jackets together to see if we could make some kind of raft to lift the grandfather out of the water. But first, I didn't like how the life jackets looked, and I also didn't want to put anybody in the water to get him up. It just seemed like that was not a smart thing to do at the moment and where we were. I think the best thing would have been if we'd had a dinghy, or if the boat had a drogue, or if we had some way of tying a life sling around the entire body of the person in the water. The life sling is not designed for an unconscious or injured person. And I have to say that on all the tests that we did, the victim was a very active part of the safety and getting out of the water with each life sling program we did. And in the end, we have a certificate from the Coast Guard that proves that they thought it was an outstanding job that we did, which was very nice of them to send us. I think the important takeaways are: teach your crew to use the radio, and maybe above the radio, put the name of your boat, the description of your boat, and how you would want them to make a Mayday call. The second is have a second radio topside, whether it's a handheld or a repeater or something. It would have been extraordinarily helpful if I didn't have to go down below each time. And have a radio that monitors multiple channels simultaneously. Am I losing Zoom?
Yeah, something happened.
Oh,
You're still good.
okay,
I'm just going to show a couple of
okay. Use your GPS for reporting your exact positions, but also use markings around you, because I don't think that when I gave the GPS coordinates, anybody was looking at a chart. When I was able to describe that we were behind Misery Island at Can 5 and Nun 4 at the entrance to Manchester Harbor, it was easy for somebody to find us on the chart. Remember, when you're talking to the Coast Guard, that they change you to channel 2. And if you need additional help, you have to go back to 16 to make calls for additional help. The Coast Guard doesn't like that, and especially didn't like it that day because there were so many calls on 16.
You meant to say channel 22.
No, they, 22, I'm sorry. They turned us to 12 on the ride in. You're right. They put you on 22 when they're talking about the rescue. And you have to go back to 16 if you want to get more help. Keep your life jackets, cushions, slings, and blocks and tackle handy. One of the things is when they threw everything overboard and he missed it, they couldn't pull it in and throw it a second time. It just went out to sea. Mark, if you know that you're going to be able to use a block and tackle, it's really helpful to have the block and tackle marked as to what goes to the halyard and what goes to the life sling. And think about the difficulties of lifting an unconscious or injured person. It's totally different than lifting a person who is not injured and is alert. Wear a life jacket or a PFD, especially in challenging situations. And remember that cold is the enemy. Eric was very smart to put the hat on the MOB to keep him warm. Connie was very smart to reduce anxiety by constantly speaking to him. Also, we made sure that we kept him so that he was always able to breathe and make sure that the airwaves remain unrestricted with your person in the water. Keep the victim's head out of the water, keep the oxygen flowing, reduce the amount of water splashing in the face. That's what would have been wrong if I pulled him over to the windward side. He would have just been filling with water with his mouth open. And try to see what you have on your boat that you can devise that can go under somebody or around them tightly. Like I said, a drogue, a bosun's chair would work. But I think the most important thing is stay on the boat. And that's it. I'll take questions.
Was there any damage to your boat?
A small part of the keel was damaged, but the divers said that we could fix it when we hauled the boat in the fall. And that's what we did. We were very fortunate because we hit the rocks several times. But I'll tell you, one of the benefits of an older boat and a Sabre is we're part tank.
I have a Sabre too. I love it.
Yeah. We've had that boat in really rough weather. We've been in some really critical times. I don't really have ownership of the boat. I have a partnership with somebody, and I was able to take the boat out anytime I wanted. That particular weekend, he wasn't with us. He was out of town. I had the boat alone. I called him to tell him the story and the damage. And all he said was, congratulations. And I'm glad you were on board because I never would have been able to do any of that. So I have to say, I came away proud of our performance. Were there other things that we could have done? There probably were. I relive this over and over again many times. I would love somebody to give me suggestions of how and what we could have done differently, because I just don't know.
Would it be possible to put extra lines around the fender and put it under him and then take the lines somehow?
Maybe if we had put a number of fenders together, that's a really good idea. Maybe we could have been able to wedge him up. Part of what I was terribly afraid of was we really didn't have control of his body. Because he was unconscious, every time we tried, even though, we just had the polypropylene line and that's not easy to winch, even when we tried to lift him, he would slip a little bit because we only had one arm. We really didn't have the other arm covered. And when you went to lift him, because he was unconscious, the life sling would come up enough that his hands would just go into the air. And had I known that maybe we could have gone and fastened something around his waist at that time, I don't know. But all of this happened really quickly. And when we couldn't get him up on the ladder, I couldn't think of another way to do it. And I could see that the grandfather was gray, but the father wasn't looking much better. And we had to get him out of the water too. The good thing was he stayed with the grandfather, and he physically held him above water with the life sling, so that my crew could grab portions of the clothes. And as he got close, each one of them grabbed another part of his jacket. And that's what saved him, was his buttoned jacket.
What about if there was something like, I don't know, I can't think of what, other than maybe like a working jib, a smaller sail that you might have had in a bag that you could have somehow wrapped around him and attached to the main halyard, and you know what I mean, to like at least maybe lift him to keep him supported if you couldn't haul him out with that.
Yeah, I had thought, did we have the sail bag on board?
Yeah.
Because I thought if I could get him in the sail bag, you know, just get his feet in the sail bag and hoist him that way, maybe I could get him up out of the water. But we didn't have that, you know.
Right.
You put your sails on at the dock and you take everything back to your home.
Sure.
We really, you know, I had sailed the boat enough and knew what the equipment was on board. I knew what we didn't have. I thought about putting, you know, cushions together and trying to get him up on the cushion. But again, my fear was if I got him too far out of the water, his arms were going to lift up and the life sling wasn't going to be any good.
Yeah.
And I really didn't want to put one of my crew in the water because we already had 2 people in distress. If one of my crew had gone in the water and we had a 3rd person in distress, I'm not sure that it would have been a successful event.
Yeah.
But I appreciate everything that you're saying. I didn't think of putting fenders together. I didn't think about putting our cushions in the water. And those
Sounds like you did a great job to me.
well, it's a great job because both of those people survived.
Yes.
And when I started, Trina Benneker wrote the story and sent it to her buddies in Washington, who are part of the Life Sling group. And they wrote back, and I forget, it is such a small number of people who survive Man Overboard, especially if it's an unconscious victim. It was like 2 to 5% are successfully rescued. You know, it was just amazing. And their suggestions were, if you carry a drogue, it's a great way to lift somebody out of the water. And
Describe what a drogue is like, Barbara, describe it.
A drogue, I think, is like a triangular sail, and you would drag it behind your boat if you were going too fast. It slows you down. So there are enough lines on it that you use to connect to the stern of your boat that you could have made it a basket.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. A basket or netting would have been fantastic. That would be the best. And Daryl has some pictures of things that would really be terrific. But again, we didn't have any of that on board.
Can you?
Yeah, go ahead. Your turn.
Just take a quick look at the life sling here. Okay, so the life sling has basically a loop, the yellow line there, that goes through 2 eyes for those 2 long cushions, which are supposed to go underneath, you know, basically your armpits. So Barbara's, you know, problem was that they first of all, they couldn't get it on him fully. The son could not get it on his father, the grandfather, fully. Only one arm was in there. But if it was a thinner victim with less clothing, in theory, you could get them in there. And even then, there is a concern whether or not they would stay in there unless you could tie their arms down or something of that sort. That's still an open question. We're not going to say it's not possible. But when you're an unconscious victim or one who is suffering hypothermia, even if they are conscious, they have zero strength. So they can't do anything. They have to get help, and putting a swimmer in the water almost seems like a necessity if you can do it. But that swimmer has to be protected too. So there's a huge factor there. And of course, you don't want to go overboard in the first place, but that's the problem. When you have people going overboard, we have a duty to assist. We can't just walk away. That's actually law. If you can help, assist without putting yourselves in danger, you have to do that. And that's what they did.
Well, fishermen have something called survival suits. The fishermen that fish in the winter.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the very terrifying things that we learned the next day was less than 24 hours, a fisherman off of Swampscott fell in the water, and his crew was not able to get him back on board alive.
Wow.
Yeah. That Columbus Day weekend, and I don't know because I didn't look it up to see, what happened the rest of the weekend. Apparently, there were more calls and more rescues that weekend than there had been many, many other times off that area. And whether it was particularly our area Columbus Day weekend or what, but the harbor master and the Coast Guard said that it was one of their busiest weekends ever. Of course, it's a busy weekend because there's more boats out, but the complications of the strong winds and the heavy gusts just caught a lot of people off guard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, bad weather forecasts can do that too.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions for Barbara?
Yes, we have a question. Hi, it's Jim Can here. When
Hi.
did you turn your motor off?
When did I turn my motor off? When I was about 5.5 feet, when my bow was about 5.5 feet approaching the victims in the water. And I just slid in beside them.
And do you
I
think
wasn't
it
going
helped-
very fast, so my boat was able to stop then.
Do you think it helped that the father went in the water to help the grandfather?
Yeah. At the point that I came to them, they were together.
Could you have just rescued the grandfather without the father in the water?
I don't think so. Not without putting one of my crew in the water, let's put it that way. And I don't know if by the time we got there, because of what Deb was telling me, whether or not the grandfather would have still been coming to the surface. Because one of the things that she was describing to me was when he went down the first time, he went down and he popped up and his chest popped up. When he went down the second time, his chest didn't come up out of the water anymore, only his neck did. And when he came up the third time, his mouth was just barely out of the water. He never used his arms. So whether when he hit the cold water, he became unconscious, or whether he hurt himself going in, we don't know. But if he'd gone down a fourth time, I don't know that we would have been there in time or been able to reach him. His son got him at the last possible moment, I think, unless he would have been able to dive under to get him. Part of it, I think, was, first of all, the man was unconscious, so he wasn't trying to help himself. And secondly, his clothing was filling with water. It was cold that day, so everybody was wearing wool sweaters and down jackets and a lot of clothing.
I think it's worth repeating too, that the father, you said, was a Navy SEAL.
Yeah, the father was a Navy SEAL. He was not, when he jumped in the water, I expected it would take him 4 to 5 minutes to get to his father. He did it in 10 of the strongest strokes I have ever seen in my life. I never saw an arm reach out so far and a body move so fast. I don't think that somebody without his training could have reached the father in time.
But let's imagine for 1 second, what if he had swim fins and a wetsuit?
Well, he would have had to get dressed and he would have had to find that equipment. If they didn't have their PFDs topside, they didn't have their swimsuits and their fins available. If I'd had a wetsuit and fins, I probably would have said to Eric, maybe you can go in and hold them up. But I didn't have that either. And I don't know, he was so heavy, whether or not anybody could have been under him to hold him up, because this man who was so strong, the father, had a really hard time keeping the grandfather's head above water while we came in to rescue them. He was not able to get parts of his body out of the water. He was just able to keep his head up out of the water. And he wasn't trying to swim with him because he knew we were coming. It was obvious that we were coming in to get them when he reached the dad. And it was obvious that his son would not be able to get them at that point because the sails were still up and he couldn't get the engine back down into the water. I don't know at what point the son got the sails down and got the engine in the water. I do think that the reason he was near us while this was going on was maybe he thought he was going to pull in alongside and try the rescue, because the white sailboat had lower rails than we did. But at that point, the father thought it was better to get the son to shore. Maybe he thought that the grandfather was dead and didn't want his son rescuing a dead grandfather. I don't know. You know, you don't know what's going on in people's minds. But he sent his son back to the dock and said, call the ambulance. We need an ambulance. And that's what the son did. He motored back to Tuck's Landing and called an ambulance.
Any more questions? If not, I'll do a quick review here of some gear, the modern day gear that may or may not work any better than what Barbara was working with. And a parbuckle is part of the story. Give me a second here.
I saw something. Somebody's got a hand raised. It could be Katrina Beneker.
Anybody can speak up. They just have to unmute.
I don't know how to do this Zoom.
Okay, you're talking to us. You're doing great, Trina.
Are you there? I could see you, but I just was going through my emails and saw Daryl's email and clicked on it, and here you are.
Okay, well, so glad. I've been, kudos to you. I've said it several times. You are really the force behind our being able to do this rescue.
Thank you.
Okay, so
I have
good to hear your voice.
Sorry.
Good to hear your voice.
Thank you. I have some materials here if anybody or a group of people want to try to put together a program. So I've got them here. I've got Jim Dunphy's life sling. I got quite a bit of materials. So
We'll be in touch. Is your phone useful, or should we use email mainly?
what was that again?
Should we use your telephone number, or should we use your email?
Telephone's good.
Okay, great. We'll be in touch. I just want to show the folks a little more stuff here. I just pulled this out of the web today. It was just interesting because it sort of gives you a sequence of events. Of course, this is for actually a power boat, but Man Overboard wheel. You know, there are certain things you want to cover, so it's good to have something like this printed out ahead of time, and you can just refer to it, I guess, when in your state of mind is elsewhere. But here's a basic life sling. There's different versions of the life sling. They have the life sling 3, I think, has a longer line than the life sling 2. But basically, there's the rope is a loop that goes through these 2 black eyes on the life sling, just so people understand how this works. You get the victim in the armpits, would be within, get this through the person over the head and under the arms, and now it lifts from the armpits, and hopefully the arms stay down while you're lifting. But how do you lift? Well, you don't lift with the length of the line. The length of the line is just, to be towed behind the boat to get the float to the victim that is hopefully conscious. So what happens next, you get them up to the boat, secured tightly, and then you do the following. You take out your 3-to-1 block and tackle. This is one version of it. And you hook it up in the eye, the yellow eye, to hoist the whole thing out of the water. I think that's correct. Correct me if I'm wrong, Trina. So this block and tackle will hook into the short length eye of the yellow line there, and you're going to hoist the whole victim out from there. But what are you going to hoist with? Well, you have to swing your mainsail boom out.
No, it's easier to use your mainsail halyard.
Or halyard. There's different ways. It depends where you want to bring the person on board, really. But you can use the main boom, or you can use a halyard. Which halyard do you feel would be best, Katrina?
Are you asking me?
Yes.
I'm not sure I got the question, but usually we go with the halyard.
The main halyard is what
Yeah, the
what we
main.
were practicing with.
I stand corrected there. Okay. And but I'm also going to, because we're talking about an incapacitated victim in this case, I started pulling some stuff off the web, and there's a whole bunch of stuff out there because it's such an enormous problem. And of course, it's also used for recovery of dead bodies, frankly, but it's the same scenario. And one of the more promising ones that I came across, and by the way, the one in the middle of your screen right now, how an 8-stone crew, the wife, can recover a 20-stone MOB, the husband, is a fascinating tale, because Yachting Monthly put this up, because they tried 4 different methods before she could recover her husband when he was incapacitated. One of the more popular items I looked at, though, was this SOS Marine, and I got some pictures of that. You attach it to your rail, and it gives you both a ladder for a able victim, but notice it's in the middle of the hull, the boat. It's not at the stern. The stern is a very dangerous place to be if the boat's in any kind of seaway. Of course, most of these practice sessions are done in calm waters, but the stern can literally kill you, pound you like a hammer. It's a dangerous place, and the ladder too can really hit you hard. So you want to be able to climb out amidships if you can, and that's what this facilitates, as well as the capability for parbuckling a victim if you can get the victim in the right location, and that's part of the problem. In this case, they show the victim in place, and the other crew is obviously hauling him up with a halyard amidships, and believe it or not, that's where they end the rescue, as if it is mission accomplished. Part of the problem with parbuckling is that you're going to get pressure on your body. I don't know how bad it is when you're at the rail like this, but maybe you can actually bring, in this case, Barbara could have maybe brought this victim in at the rail and literally put him over the dock and lowered him onto the dock.
I would have at least been able to keep him out of the water until help came.
But the problem is, again, you've got to get him into it in the first place. For that, you may or may not need a swimmer. It's hard to say. If you can maneuver him from the boat deck, that's great.
Well, the thing to remember is that my victim was not horizontal. My victim was vertical. I
That's
have no way to make my dictum horizontal.
that's not fair. But this guy's floating horizontal. You know why? Because he's got his neoprene booties on. He's
Uh-huh.
under there. It's cheating. They make it easy. It's not at all. Okay. But there's also other rescue gear we just want to just mention here as a general comment. Throw ropes. West Marine has a good article on that. It's like a throwing line, a heaving line is the proper term, but it's not a heaving line. It's not really weighted. You can load some water into the bag, but the bag contains the rope for the initial throw. For the second or third throw, you literally soak the bag with some water, get some water in there to add weight, and then you can actually throw it further and get it to somebody. So that's, for your basic easy rescue, that's a good way to go. But we'll be posting all this stuff on the website. And if anybody has any other ideas, please mention them. I'll get back to the gallery view here. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. I really appreciate you coming and listening, and thank you for your suggestions. I hope I am not in this situation again, ever. And I look forward to seeing you all in person and sailing and whatever. So,
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Barbara. Very helpful.
welcome.
Thank you, Barb.
We'll see you Saturday.
Okay, that's a deal.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Hi, Sue Ellen.
Hi, Michelle.
Bye.
Bye-bye.